Hi everyone, this is the last video of the week. This video is going to be about how to write a good title. We haven't really had to think about that or learn about that throughout this quarter. Our titles for the In Defense of essay were pretty straightforward. But now that you have your first draft of the How Does a Poet Make a Meaning essay due next week, even though it's just a problem-making or rhetorical situation draft, still want to start you off on the right foot with thinking about titles. And a title that you can give to that final paper that might give it some focus, might even help you focus on what argument you're trying to develop as you go. So this will be a fairly short video. What we're going to do is take the titles that we've read so far this quarter and apply a couple criteria to them to see what makes a good title and what we should try to accomplish with our titles in the first place. So more or less, what's the purpose of a title is a way to think about this video. So I have already collected all of our titles that we've read this quarter. And I'm just going to get it here. And I've written them here. And we're going to look at how these different criteria apply to the titles we've read, and then make a statement about what we want to do with titles ourselves. So, two categories here to look at really quickly. The first one says a title is or can be an introduction to a number of key features of an essay. It can introduce the topic, it can introduce the audience, it can also introduce a specific context, maybe even problem, as we have practiced with problem making. And it can introduce or hint at the actual argument or purpose of the essay as well. So we have these four different criteria. Now we're going to look at our titles to see which ones introduce topic, which ones introduce audience, which ones introduce both, or multiple aspects of this list. I don't think any of our titles introduce all four. Titles that introduce all four are difficult to come by, I think. Because titles are supposed to be compact, they're supposed to be short and catchy. So if you are going to find a way to get all four of these categories in your language, it's going to have to be very concise. But let's look at the titles that we've read so far and make sense about which one's best. So, based on the above criteria, which titles do you think are best, aka best prepares the audience for the essay to come? We'll get to that criteria in a second, but to start, we're just going to identify which ones introduce each of these things. So, let's look at the titles that only introduce the topic. They just introduce us to the topic. And I'm going to highlight those, let's see, in red. So we have pretty much our middle section here with these endangered pleasures, these essays from Barbara Holland, and then the one Kenneth Koch essay, The Language of Poetry. And those are all introducing the topic. I think we have a couple others that introduce topic. Okay, we have diction, tone, and voice, imagery, and sound. All of these introduce just the topic. We haven't read these essays yet, but we will be soon. They're from Mary Oliver's A Poetry Handbook. Let's see. I think a writer's decisions is only the topic. The topic of the essay is going to be a writer's decisions. I think that captures our titles that introduce the topic only. So let's keep going. Let's then move on to titles that introduce the audience, and we will give that another color, maybe green. So, thinking of audience, let's go through Read a Poem, Adios Drunk and White, You're Really Something, Most misread poem in America. There might be a hint with America at an audience there. So I'm going to highlight it for now. Poetry Handbook, the story is true. We seems to be a reference to an audience, and potentially teens as well. We're going to question that in just a second. Same thing with America, but it does seem like it's discussing an audience of American people, an audience who's captured by a we, and an audience related in some way to teens. Okay? The context or the problem, so the situation, the circumstance that the essay is going to address. Let's see. Do we have any context in any of these? You know, Barbara Holland's secondary title, In Defense of, let's put this in blue, seems to be hitting it at a context or a problem. They're in need of defense. The problem here is the most misread poem in America. So the problem is the most misread poem. It also kind of doubles as the topic. The topic is The Road Not Taken, but the problem is that it's misread, so it's kind of a little bit of both. In America, I don't think we can say that America or Americans in general are the audience, maybe a broad audience. So I'll keep it there, American audience, because it's in America where this poem's being misread. But the context is clear, the problem is clear, the most misread. Let's see. At risk of losing serious readers, that is the context or the problem. Same problem might be suggested with this. It's almost a rhetorical question. Do teens read seriously anymore? No, but it's not a true context, so I'm not going to highlight it just yet. But now you see some context as well. Lastly, the argument or the purpose. Do we have any titles that hint at the purpose? So yes, we do. Edward Hirsch's poem, or sorry, essay, is an argument about. Is it too much like red? I think it is. Let's go with yellow. Nope, that doesn't work. Let's go with purple. Okay, that works. How to read. It's the purpose or the part of the argument of the essay. Now you see how some of these things combine. A poem, well, that's the topic. The topic of the essay is poetry, but the purpose is teaching us how to read it. Let's see, what else? When Charles Baxter says the breath of life, inflection and the breath of life, he is very much hinting at a purpose or an argument of his essay. He's saying that inflection is the reality of text. It's the reality of a fictional story. It creates a realistic environment for the reader to live in. It is the breath of life. So he makes an argument there. This one, we're reading an excerpt later on in the quarter. There seems to be an argument about storytelling and its ability to tell the truth. So we have story, that's the topic, and the fact that it is true, or storytelling is true. It seems to be making an argument or telling us what the purpose of the essay is anymore. This whole thing, if we were to highlight it, is the purpose. Well, no, not really. It hints at a purpose to get people to become serious readers, but it doesn't actually say it. Maybe it's just implied by the problem. The purpose of this essay is to answer the question, do they? Let's see. Purpose of a poetry handbook, where these 3 essays come from, is to be a handbook. The purpose is to give us instructions, almost like a how-to on how to do it. That is its purpose. The in defense of is not only a problem, but it's also part of its purpose. She's defending these things. And lastly, these were all the Adios reading comes in. Strunk and White, they were a style manual that was written many years ago for writing style. And this is an updated version, an updated style manual. And so it uses the term adios, Strunk and White, to say that there's new style techniques that we need to consider in the 21st century. And so that's argumentative too. It tells us what the argument is. The one we didn't focus on was endangered pleasures. And that is a problem. We didn't capture that fully. So just wanted to work through these titles to see how they introduce these different elements. Barbara Holland introduces the problem and then the topics that she'll write about. David Orr introduces the problem and a context or an audience that he's going to be addressing. Some of them just introduce the topic itself. What I want to point out is that even though we have a lot in this list that only introduce the topic, that these 6 essays that only introduce topic are part of a larger book whose title is much more thorough and complex in what it introduces. So it's almost like we can read every essay in this book as Endangered Pleasure in Defense of Naps. Then it introduces a problem and an argument, not just the topic. Same thing with Mary Oliver's chapters. They introduce the topic because they're part of a book, chapters in a book, that is making an argument about how to do these things, how to use these things. The title gets a little bit more complex. So you could read these as a poetry handbook. What is and how to use imagery? A poetry handbook. What is and how to use sound? So on and so forth. Of course, we still sometimes have titles that are just topics. They don't tell us anything about context or problem or argument. And in certain situations, that's fine too. I just want you to be thinking, when you make your title, how many of these things can I introduce as a way to get my reader prepared for the argument or for the problem or for the topic to come. You want to prepare them. You want to think of your title not just as a requirement, but as the first line of your essay. The first line of your essay isn't the first sentence of the first paragraph. It is your title. It is what gets your reader interested to read in the first place. Something you might want to consider for your final essay, in which you're writing to an audience who doesn't like or understand poetry. If you just had a title that said poetry, or how does a poet make meaning, or in defense of poetry, your audience might not be interested. They might need something else to capture their attention, might need to introduce some context, introduce some problem, instead of just introducing the topic or the argument on its own. So keep those things in mind. Last thing I'll say here is I'm going to point out these 2 titles from Charles Baxter and then from Barbara Holland. These titles represent what we would call an academic title that is written in 2 parts. Each of them is separated by a colon. In this kind of academic 2-part title, what often happens is that the first part uses some sort of catchy, creative, metaphorical slogan. Maybe where the word choices have a particular tone or attitude to them. And in the case of Barbara Holland, she uses this term endangered pleasures. Now, endangered, diction choice, right, that brings with it a particular tone. It's a serious tone. It is something that needs to be protected. Endangered pleasures makes us think endangered species of animals, and we've heard that before. They're in need of defending, otherwise they'll die. When we think of something dying, we feel an urgency to save. So right from the title, she uses diction choice to kind of capture our attention to this need, to this problem. And it is a little abstract, though. Endangered pleasures. Well, what are those endangered pleasures? I'm interested, but I don't get it. So she uses the second half of the title to be a little bit more straightforward. Where this might be a little indirect or creative, this is very direct in defense of, and here are the certain topics. Maybe you consider a title like that. Same thing with Baxter. You're really something is a phrase that he uses actually throughout his essay as evidence to discuss inflection and how it affects meaning. And so he starts off with "you're really something." It has "you're" in it, so automatically the audience might think that he's talking to them. They've heard this phrase before, but they don't fully know what it means in terms of the essay to come. But then he gives us a little bit more understanding about what the essay is going to be about. It's a little bit more straightforward. It's about inflection. It's about how inflection is the breath of life. So, many different ways to construct a title for you to consider. That's what I'm asking you to do. Consider it. Think about your title. Don't just title it imagery if you're writing about imagery, or sound, because that is doing the bare minimum. You're not allowed to title your essay, "How Does a Poet Make Meaning?" either. That is the title of the prompt, not the title of your essay. You're writing to an audience for a particular purpose, about a particular topic, and your title should do its best to reflect that. So I look forward to reading your first drafts next week, and I can't wait to see what kind of titles you come up with. Okay, bye.